Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Katri and today we are going to talk about all the books I read in the month of July. Alright guys, so for the month of July, I actually did really well. I read a total of 16 books this month. I'm very proud of myself. I also slightly killed myself and I did not do very good on my TBR this month. So sorry about that, but it is what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the books that I read this month in order of how I read them. The first book that I read this month was a short little novella called The Pucker Up Pact. This is by J.P. Sterling, I believe, and this was published in this month, July 10th of 2024. I was given a art copy by the author, so that was very sweet of her, and I read and reviewed it like the first, I think I read it or finished it at least like on July 1st, so right at the beginning of the month. This was cute and sweet. It's a novella, so I just feel like the author didn't have enough time to really go super in depth with the characters, but it's a clean, sweet little hockey romance, just a quick one. So if that's something that you're looking for, I would recommend it. I only gave this one 3 or 3.5, I believe, so it just wasn't my particular like favorite. All right, and the second book I read this month is, if you can see it, The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams. This is a play. I have seen this play before, and I do think I prefer it acted out versus just like read, which, you know, it's a play, that's what you're supposed to do. But it was a short little one that I had on my shelf, hadn't read, had it for years, so I'm glad I got it off. This was one on my TBR, so you know, I at least got one done on my TBR. But I believe I gave this a 3 stars also. Just short, quick little, you know, play. Nothing in particular stood out to me for this one. So all right, and then the third book that I read was The Death of Lincoln, a picture history of the assassination. This was by Leroy Heyman. I also gave this a 3.5 stars, I believe. I almost DNF'd this, but I didn't, because I started reading it out loud to my husband and I found it much more entertaining that way. So I enjoyed it. Just a nice little history account of those events, and if it's something you're interested in, I would definitely recommend it. All right, and next I read Stay With Me by Becky Wade. This is a Christian contemporary romance, I think. It's got more than just romance. Like, there was kind of like a mystery plot, and I don't know, I really like the mystery side, but I read this for Reading Booktubers Recommend Me Books video, and book lover Amanda recommended this one to me. I gave this one a 3.75 stars, I believe. If you want to know more of my in-detailed thoughts of why I didn't just like go gaga over it, then you can check out that video. But I still enjoyed this book and I would recommend this book. There were a couple things in it that were just not quite my taste in books, so yeah. All right, and the next book was another one off my TBR, yay me, and that was The Off Limits Rule by Sarah Adams. Sarah Adams is an instant like buy author for me. I haven't like hated or disliked strongly anything that she's written. I really enjoy her writing style. She's a clean contemporary romance author, and I really loved this one. The first one I read was The Cheat Sheet, and it is my favorite by far. I still think it's my favorite, but that was a 5-star for me. After that, I've also read When in Rome and The Rule Book, and neither of those were 5 stars for me. They just didn't hit right, but I still enjoyed them. This one, on the other hand, was another 5-star. So, and I also have a like dedicated book review for this one, so if you want to hear a little bit more just about this one in general, then you can also go over and check that out. But yes, I very much enjoyed and would recommend this one. And the next book I finished this month was Beaches, Bungalows, and Burglaries by Tanya Capez, I believe. I did this one as an audiobook, and I actually buddy read this with Lucy over at the Lucy Chronicles. Thank you so much for buddy reading this with me, Lucy. It made it a lot more fun. This is kind of like, I think it's classified as like a cozy mystery maybe. I haven't read a ton of these. This one for me was a little bit hard to initially get into because I didn't like the narrator of the audiobook. She was kind of plain and monotone. But I did really start to get into it kind of like that halfway point, and that started to like matter less and less for me. I enjoyed it. This is a very long series, me and Lucy found out. I'd love to read a little bit more to kind of see what happens with the main character, because there was some romantic stuff that was left, you know, kind of like open for the next book in it, but I don't know if I'm gonna have the time anytime soon to get to that with my never-ending physical TBR that I have. But this was a pretty enjoyable, like, I think I gave it a 3.5 stars, and it was a lot more fun buddy reading it with my girl Lucy. So thank you so much for buddy reading that with me, girl. Okay, and then the next book I read was Powerless by Lauren Roberts. I also read this for the Booktubers Recommend Me books video, and this one was recommended by Jordan Lane, and I loved this one. This was a 5 stars for me. If you want to hear more in detailed thoughts, head on over to that video. I'm gonna be saying that a lot, sorry. But in general, I'm not a huge fantasy girl. I can't stay around for 800 pages of world building. I'm sorry, my husband, but yeah. This is very much, I'll just say this. This is Hunger Games meets My Hero Academia in a fantasy setting with a enemies to lovers trope. That's what this book is to me. Honestly, the enemies to lover and the banter in this, like, this is one of the few things that I'm like, I don't really care if your plot is like bad or not that thought out. I like him and in for the romance so much that I'm gonna give you a 5 stars. So if you're a big fantasy reader to where you want all the world building and you don't want plot holes and you don't want to read something you've already read, you might not like this book. Those things aren't crazy, insanely like needed for me, and I honestly prefer fantasy that doesn't overwhelm me. So I loved it, but I 100% understand that it's very clearly not going to be everybody's forte, and especially not every fantasy lover. So just a fair warning. Okay, and then the next book I read also for that same video was Style A For Aunties by, I believe this is Jessie Q. Sonte or something. I butcher names all over the place, so I profusely apologize, but if you've been here, you know this. I listened to this one on audiobook, and this did hurt the rating for me a little bit. I believe I only gave this a 3 star. It was funny. It did what it was supposed to do. It was entertaining. It was funny. Thinking back on it, I think back pleasant memories on a good few parts. Like, it kept me entertained. The problem with this one is I have little kids, and it was audiobook, and she liked to cuss. She liked to have cussing in her writing, and as an audiobook, I was not able to listen to it as a lot. I had to put headphones on to listen, or, stuff like that. And I felt like the cussing was just very unnecessary in most instances. I don't prefer cussing in my writing, but when I'm reading it, it's a little bit easier for me to glaze over and not affect like my mood as much than hearing it out loud, I found. So that did affect the rating a little bit for me. There is also a same-sex little couple like mention at like the very end there that was just kind of thrown in. It's not really that prevalent, right? I'm trying to remember if this is what I'm thinking of. Yes, but yeah, it's there quite like right at the end, so that bumped it down a tiny bit for me. But it was like it's kind of like a romance mystery, so this one was interesting. But yeah, the book I read for that video was Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. This is a sci-fi thriller, and I found that when it comes to thrillers, apparently I like sci-fi thrillers, not psychological or whatever other kind of thrillers that I have been reading and hating, but sci-fi thrillers. I should have realized this earlier, but thank you, Lauren, for helping me realize that in recommending this book. This was so good. I loved this. There were a few things that, I kind of had a little bit of problems with, and it wasn't a perfect rating for me. This was a 4.5 though, still, even despite all that. So if you want to hear a little bit more about it, hop on over to that video. But yeah, I really loved this book and I would definitely recommend it. And the next book that I read was The Peppermint Lodge. This is Hockey Sweethearts book number 4 by Jean Oram. Been reading through these little books because I really like the first one. Every book since has been like not like, they've all been in the 3-star range. I think this one for me was a 3.5 star. I did enjoy this one a little bit more than the last one I read in this series, but none of them have been as long or developed out as the first one was for me personally. They've all been shorter stories and just kind of like sweet fluffs in between. So take with that what you will, but it is a clean hockey romance and I did give it a 3.5, so it's still enjoyable. This one takes on a single parent trope, so I liked and enjoyed that aspect a lot. All right, and then next I did my Hunger Games reread. So I read the first Hunger Games book. This stayed at a 4-star for me. Love this series. I have a lot of thoughts in my vlog. I'll try not to copy too many of them, but yeah, 4-star. Also 4-star was Catching Fire. And then Mockingjay I actually bumped down a little bit. That was a 3.75 star for me. For me, a lot of the political stuff just, I don't know, it hit differently since I'm older now, I guess. And I didn't like how the original series here, didn't talk about a lot of like morally right and wrong when there was so much opportunity for it. And this one especially had a lot of that. And since Peeta's kind of seems to be the only moral voice in the series, and then he's not really here, if you know what I mean, as much, it brought the rating down for the last one. But I still enjoy them and I would still recommend them, and I still enjoyed my reread of them. And then also in that same video, I read the newer one, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Susanna Collins. And this one I actually rated higher than the original series. This one was a 4.25 for me. I go into a lot of details in that blog. So if you want to know all my insane ramblings about this, check that out. But if you don't want to know all my insane ramblings, just know that I don't think this was too long. I honestly found so much of it so interesting. There was just so many little details that all had like important roles to do with the story and with Snow's history and the Hunger Games, and I found it all so interesting. And one of the big reasons too why I rated this higher was because we had some morals in this book. Unlike the original trilogy, we had a lot of good, like morally right and morally wrong and even morally gray, and we had numerous ones from each of those categories, and I just ate it up. I really loved it. I felt like it was what the original trilogy was missing for me in this book, so I would definitely recommend this one. My friend saw the movie and she loved the movie and now wants to read the book, and I now really want to see the movie, so maybe I'll get to that next. The next book was Ammara, Daughter of the Nile. This is by Elise Jarvis McGraw, I believe. I probably said that wrong, but this was one of my book club books. I have 2 book clubs if you're new here, and one of them is my BFF book club. We've all been picking like some of our favorite books. This was one of my other besties' favorite books, so I had not read it yet. This was interesting. The language was kind of like weird because it was a little bit modernized, but also not. It obviously follows like Egyptian time frame and like the pharaohs and stuff like that. It was interesting. I had a hard time getting into this book, but once I got about halfway through, I did start to really get invested in the story. I started to figure stuff out and I started to get really invested. I was very happy with the way it ended. I believe I gave this a 3.5 stars. So I still thoroughly enjoyed my read. It's not been one of my favorites from the overall book club, but it's also not my least favorite at all. Just a pretty enjoyable read, so. All right, and then the last book that I read for the month of July was for my other book club, which is my women's Christian nonfiction book club, and this month we read C.S. Lewis's Reflections on the Psalms, and I tapped this book up. As you can see, I don't normally do this on my books. I don't know why. I just don't normally do tabs, even though I really like this. I don't know. Maybe it's because, how do you guys store these? Like, because you can't put it in there because then all the tabs are gonna, so I don't know. I'm confused. Anyway, this was a good book. I rated this a 4 stars. C.S. Lewis, I love him and his mind, but his mind is also crazy sometimes, and some of the thoughts he has. What on earth are you thinking, man? Like, where does that come from? I don't know. If you've read him, you probably understand me. Like, because some of his stuff, I'm like, oh, that's glorious. Some of his stuff is like, well, yeah, like, is that not obvious to everybody? And then some of his stuff is like, are you the same person? Like, what did you just say? So, yes, there are some things that I'm like top tier, and there are other things that I'm like, this was great. You had so many good things, but I can't always give him like 5 stars because sometimes some of the tangents he goes on are just, I don't fully comprehend it, and some things I do comprehend, I don't fully agree with. So, but you know, it's fun to read like that. But for the most part, I love C.S. Lewis. So, very happy that I finished this. I finished it like on the last day of July, so I'm like, yes, just barely got it in there. So, yes. Okay, so those are all the books I read in the month of July. I hope you enjoyed. I would love to know what your favorite book of the month of July was. I'm like, I always try to think, like, what was my favorite book? And then I'm like, well, if I had a 5 star, then that would be like my favorite book, right? So I guess my top 2 favorite books are The Off-Limits Rule. The Off-Limits Rule? I feel like I'm not saying words correctly today. By Sarah Adams, and then Powerless by Lauren Roberts. Those were my top 2 for the month, and I would love to hear what your top 2 for the month of July are. Maybe you can convince me to read them at some point in the future. You know, when this giant physical TBR that you can't see is whittled down a little bit. So, yeah. Thank you guys so much for joining and for watching and for being wonderful human beings. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!